Section 3.2, comparing and ordering fractions and decimals. Ordering just means to put them in order from either least to greatest, greatest to least, or on a number line. So those are the two ways that we compare and order fractions and decimals. We will put them on a number line that you've used before in years past, and ordering them from least to greatest, smallest to biggest, or biggest to smallest, or greatest to least. There's two ways we can do that. We can use equivalent fractions, which we've discussed, fractions that are not necessarily the same, but are equal in some way, or turning them into decimals. So first things first, we have a number line here. We have 0 to 5, and then we have 5 fractions. We have a fourth, we have 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, and 5/4. So we look here, and then we would need to put them on the number line where they would go, in the order that they would go. Now, of course, 1/4 is the smallest, so 1/4 would probably go before all of the other ones down here. And then 2/4 is only a half, so it would go in here. And then 3/4 would go in here. And 4/4 is 1 whole, so it would go on 1. And then 5/4 or 5/4 is more than 1, as it's an improper fraction. All improper fractions always give us at least a 1 whole number, which would fall in there. We're not going to be using number lines that much. The main purpose of this was just to show that you would put all of the fractions into the order that they're supposed to go on the line where they're supposed to go. You'll notice that none of the fractions ended up over 2, because when you change, all of these fractions don't equal to over 2. Now, making equivalent fractions, to put them in order from least to greatest, we have to find equivalent fractions. It means it has to have a common denominator. The bottom number has to be the same, so that all of the pieces are cut into the same. So all of the items, are cut into the same number of pieces. It makes it much easier to figure it out that way. So our denominators for our sets of numbers that we have 9/8, 7/8, 1 1/4, and 3/4. So our denominators are 8 and 4. So in this case, it's fairly straightforward. We're going to make our denominators 8, because 4 goes into 8. It'll make it a lot easier. So 9/8, because we're using 8 as our denominator, we can leave as 9/8. And same thing, 7/8, we can leave it as 7/8, because we're going to use 8 as our denominator. Now, 1 1/4, we're going to have to change. We're going to have to make sure that the fraction is now cut into 8 pieces. So we need to make sure that we've done that. But first things first, what we're going to do is we are going to change. We are going to change this into 2 separate pieces. So we have to make it into 4/4, which is the whole. 4/4 equals 1. And we're going to be adding 1/4 to it that we've already got. When we add them together, we get 5/4. So 1 1/4, 1 1/4, is the same as 5/4. The 4/4 is 1 whole, and the 1/4 is 1/4. I've just broken them up and made them both into fractions. Now I'm going to add them together, and 4 plus 1 is 5. The object is still cut into 4 pieces, so our denominator stays 4. Now we need to make 5/4 into 8 pieces. We need to make sure that our denominator becomes 8. We need to cut that shape, or that whatever is cut into fourths, into 8. And we do that. How do we make 4 into 8? Well, we need to multiply by 2. And what we do to the bottom of our fraction, we have to do to the top. We multiply the denominator by 2. We have to multiply the numerator by 2. Well, 5 times 2 is 10, and 4 times 2 is 8. So 1 1/4, when you change that into a fraction in eighths, is 10/8. Those are equivalent fractions. 1 1/4 is the same thing as 5/4, which is the same thing as 10/8. It's just cut into more pieces. Now we have to do the same thing with 3/4. Because we've already got the 3/4 on its own, we don't have a whole number. We can just go straight to our multiplying. We're going to do the same thing we did with the other one. We're going to multiply the top and the bottom by 2, because we want to make our denominator into 8. And then we end up with 3 times 2 is 6, and 4 times 2 is 8. So 3/4 as an equivalent fraction is 6/8. So now that they're all in eighths, we can see that 9/8, 7/8, 6/8, and 10/8. So each of those numbers, we can see which is the least to the greatest. So the smallest one would be 6/8, but we don't put 6/8 because that wasn't the number we were asked to order. We were asked to order 3/4. So we're going to put 3/4 here in the least area. Okay? And then the next one is 7/8. So I'm going to put 7/8 next in line. And then the ones that we have left are 9/8 and 10/8. Well, 9/8 is smaller, so that would be next. And the biggest number is 1 1/4, or 10/8, that we made an equivalent fraction for. So the four numbers we were given originally were 9/8, 7/8, 1 1/4, and 3/4. After making equivalent fractions cut into 8 pieces, we found that 3/4 is the smallest number, followed by 7/8, then 9/8, and then 1 1/4 after we changed it into 10/8. Now, using the same numbers, we're going to change them into decimals. Some people find it easier to just go straight from a fraction into a decimal and order them that way. So we have 9/8. So we divide the numerator by the denominator, 9 divided by 8. And the answer to that is 1 125 thousandths, 1.125. Took 7/8, divided 7 by 8, and that gave us 875 thousandths, or 0.875. Took 1 1/4. Now we have one whole already, so we can just put that down. We know that that's going to have at least one whole number. And then we divided the numerator by the denominator. 1 divided by 4 gave us 0.25. So 1 1/4, thinking about it in dollars and cents, 1 1/4 is $1.25, or 1 1/4 is 1.25. And then we came up here to 3/4, and when you have 3/4, it's the same thing as 75 cents, or 0.075. 3 divided by 4 equals 0.75. To change a fraction into a decimal, again, you just divide the top number by the bottom number, and you've got your decimal. Now, based on changing them into decimals, we're going to order our original fractions from least to greatest. Again, the smallest one was 0.75, so that means that 3/4 is the smallest number. So I'm going to put that in the least. And then we move along, and our next smallest decimal is 875 thousandths, and in a fraction form that was 7/8. So I'm going to put that next in line. And then we had 1.125 and 1.25. Now 1.125 is a longer number technically because it has more digits, but 1.1 is smaller than 1.2. So 1.125 is next, or our original fraction was 9/8, which only leaves us with our last one, 1.25, which was originally 1 1/4. And if you look back at what we found with the equivalent fractions, the box is the same. All of them are in the same order. Sometimes you will get numbers that do not have easy fractions to find common denominators for. When we had our fractions and we had 4 and 8 as our denominators, those were really easy because 4 goes into 8. 4 is a factor of 8. It's really easy to change a 4 into an 8. But if you're given a couple of different denominators, if you're given, like, what about 3, 5, and 8? You've got to find a common denominator that all three of those numbers go into. What would we do then? That's when we would probably use the decimal way, going through and changing all of our fractions into decimals. You can do the decimal version anytime you want, but you especially want to make sure that you're doing it when you've got a wide variety of denominators. So your practice questions for this video are: order these numbers from greatest to least, not least to greatest, greatest to least. 2 1/2, 11 thirds, 2 5/6, 12 sevenths. Order those fractions from greatest to least.